Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the the final talk of the meetings arranged by the Christians meeting at the Gospel Hall in Perth, in Scotland. And we're going to make a start straight away. Tonight's talk is called Fearfully and Wonderfully Made. The epic journey that will take us from the baby's conception to the baby's first cry. King David, in Psalm 139, he said, "I will praise thee, O God, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." So with his limited knowledge at the time of writing that psalm, even David could say and acknowledge that he was fearfully and wonderfully made. I just wonder what he would say if he had the knowledge that we have today, and some of that knowledge we'll share with you tonight. This is where life begins, where the sperm and the egg meet. The story, put simply, goes something like this. Man meets woman. Sperm meets egg. Mum's tummy begins to swell. The swelling lasts for 9 months. And the next thing you know, there's another mouth to feed. That is the story put simply. But what we'd like to do tonight is just to delve a little bit deeper. And I'm sure you'll agree with me at the end that it is absolutely amazing what goes on behind the scenes. I believe that every birth is a miracle. The baby seems to agree with me, amen. Here's a humorous take. I came across this on the photo site Unsplash. My pregnancy's going well. Every birth is a miracle, and the baby says amen, and head down and ready to go. We all know that life begins when the sperm from the man meets the egg from the woman. There's the egg, and there's the sperm. So pleased to meet you. And the egg is the largest cell in the human body. It can actually be seen with the naked eye. The egg is 100 times bigger than the sperm, so obviously these drawings here are not to scale. Let's take a look at the anatomy of a sperm. It has a flagellum, a tail. It has the batteries, the mitochondria. It has the nucleus packed with information that it's going to try to transfer into the egg. And the tip of that sperm is loaded with something called acrosome. Now, if there was no tail on the sperm, it couldn't move. If there was no batteries, there would be no power to move the tail. As we're going to see, if there was no acrosome, there would be no possibility of fertilizing the egg. The sperm needs those three things and other things besides, as we shall see as we go on through the talk. No tail, no movement. No batteries, no power to move. No acrosome means no possibility to fertilize the egg. Deciding the gender. We hear tales about Henry's dissatisfaction with his wives for failing to provide him with a son. And he says, "It's all your fault. I want a boy." Perhaps Henry didn't realize that he, the male, decides the gender of the child to be born. It's all to do with the chromosomes. In a woman, it's XX. In a man, it's XY. So the egg can only have an X chromosome. But it's slightly different with the man. The sperm can either have an X chromosome or a Y chromosome, as we see here. And when the two meet, well, the outcome depends upon the combination. XX, well, we saw that on the previous slide. If the sperm is carrying the X and it meets the X in the egg, it's going to be XX. The baby is going to be female. It's going to be a girl. But if X meets the Y, XY, the baby is going to be a boy. And it's all to do with those two combinations, XX, female, XY, male. Let's take a closer look at the egg. The cytoplasm, the insides of the egg. The egg has a nucleus full of information. There's a word that we hear a lot about in these days, corona, just means a crown. And there's the receptor protein molecules, a vitelline layer, and a plasma membrane. The head of the successful sperm must attempt to bind to the outer coating of the egg, but it has a problem. And the problem is this. The sperm must somehow penetrate the outer layer, the corona radiata. And how's it going to do it? Well, you need the right tools for the job. Let's go back to the anatomy of the sperm. Remember the acrosome? And we said that if there was no acrosome, then there could be no fertilization of the egg. And it works like this. Without the acrosome, there is no possibility of fertilizing the egg. The acrosome is loaded with hydrolytic enzymes, which when released will chemically digest a pathway through the exterior layers. It goes something like this. Hydrolytic enzymes will chemically digest a path through the egg jelly coat. There's the hydrolytic enzymes. And the acrosome is going to release these enzymes, which will digest, which will eat a pathway through to the outer layer, like that. And receptor protein molecule, the sperm head moves into the opening thus created and binds to the species-specific binding sites. Do you notice those two words, species-specific? For example, a human sperm will not bind with the sperm of a mouse. And when these binding proteins recognize each other, the membrane around the head of the sperm and the membrane around the egg plasma fuse together. So, correct kind, all systems go. We can have fertilization. They bind together, and this is what happens. The sperm's nucleus is then discharged into the egg's cytoplasm. So what's the nucleus? It moves into the cytoplasm of the egg, and we find then that the male and the female, the two nuclei, that they move towards each other and they bind. So there you have the fertilized egg. It's called a zygote. There is a picture, an enlarged picture. Don't forget, it's barely the size of a full stop in real life. It's enlarged greatly there. A zygote, just a little smaller than the average full stop in the daily newspaper. Fertilized egg. It is absolutely essential that the other sperm do not penetrate. So the fertilized egg needs to take immediate action. So, excuse me. So the possibility of other sperm wanting to, that are close by and wanting to fertilize with the egg, but it is essential, we see why later, why these sperm do not penetrate the egg. And it has at least two ways of doing that. The fast block to polyspermy. there's a humorous take on it. Came across that, and it sums it up. So an electrical reaction sends out a miniature tidal wave, which causes the other sperm to move away. So once that egg is fertilized, there's an electrical reaction, and it sends out a mini tidal wave, and it pushes the other sperm away. Furthermore, the egg secretes hydrogen peroxide into this newly formed space, effectively killing any sperm in the space. Hydrogen peroxide, commonly called bleach. That's the fast block. Now, the slow block works slightly differently. The slow block to polyspermy begins within 10 seconds of fusion of the sperm and the egg plasma membrane. 10 seconds. And this is how it works. Sperm egg binding releases calcium ions into the cytoplasm. Calcium ions. This causes a wave-like reaction beginning at the point of entry on the protein coat surrounding the egg. And this is what happens. It puts a protective coating on the surface, the outer surface of the egg. This, in effect, puts a hard shell on the fertilized egg, making it impregnable. Now, the word polyspermy just means, the word poly means many, and these blocks to polyspermy, it just means that they're blocking the way to other sperm attempting to fertilize the egg. You've got the fast block with the tidal wave, and you've got the slow block here with the calcium ions and putting the hard coating around the surface of the egg. This inactivates the binding receptors, and it makes it impossible for other sperm to attach. Deactivated, and no entry. Now, as a boy, I grew up with these sweets here. I'm not sure if they're available today. They were called treats, and they were marketed as this. They had a milk chocolate in a candy coat, but the marketing slogan was, the sweet that melts, the sweets that melt in your mouth and not in your hand. And the reason they didn't melt in your hand, as chocolate would normally do, is because there was a candy coating around those chocolate sweets. Reminds me so much of the fertilized egg. The slow block just puts a, can we call it a candy coating around the egg to stop other sperm fertilizing the egg. This is quite recent, April 2014, The Guardian. The Guardian reported on the work of UK researcher Dr. Gavin Wright from the Wellcome Trust Sanger Institute in Cambridgeshire. In 2005, Japanese researchers discovered a protein on the sperm. They named it Izumo, after a Japanese marriage shrine. So there's the sperm, and in 2005, Japanese researchers discovered a protein on the head of the sperm, and they called it Izumo protein. But in 2014, so when 9 years on, Dr. Wright and his team identified a protein on the egg that paired with Izumo and is necessary for fertilization. The protein is named Juno, after the Roman goddess of fertility and marriage. So there's the egg, and Dr. Wright and his team discovered a protein on the surface of the egg, and they named it Juno protein. Juno protein, Izumo protein are on the sperm. These proteins allow the sperm and the egg to recognize one another. Without this essential interaction, fertilization just cannot happen. They carried out experiments on mice. The team developed mice that lacked the Juno protein on the surface of their eggs. So no protein on the eggs within these mice. These mice were infertile. Their eggs did not fuse with normal mice sperm, highlighting that Juno protein is essential for fertility in female mice. So you had the egg, but there was no protein on the surface of the egg, and it made that mouse infertile. In the same way, male mice lacking the isomo protein are also infertile, highlighting its essential role in male fertility. No protein, no fertilization, infertile. So if the egg's got the protein, but the sperm doesn't have the protein, no babies. If the sperm has the protein, but the egg doesn't have the protein, no babies. But if the egg has the protein and the sperm has the protein, lots of babies. But it raises the question, doesn't it? Which came first? Juno or Izumo? Well, I would suggest to you that they both had to be there at the same time. Otherwise, you never ever get the next generation, and evolution dies in its tracks. There's an interesting photograph. "Thomas, stop pestering me," says Mrs. Mouse. "I've lost my Juno protein." Sweet perfume. The egg produced in the ovary makes its way down the fallopian tube, hoping to be fertilized on that journey. Over 1 million sperm are released at once, but only around 20 will get near the egg. It's not just about sperm swimming around until they find an egg, says Dr. Alan Pacey, himself an expert in human fertility. So it's not just about a sperm swimming around hoping that they'll find an egg. Well, how does the sperm know where to go to locate the egg? The egg communicates with the sperm using a chemoattractant. We would call it a deodorant. Something like this. A chemoattractant. This deodorant sends out a message saying to the sperm, "I'm over here, come and get me." The sperm is blessed with odorant receptors, sniffers. There's a lot going on the head of that sperm. Not only the protein, not only the acrosome, but also sniffers. And it picks up the odor of that attractant. "Ah, fragrance," says the sperm. Well, off he goes. And his journey goes something like this. Heading towards the deodorant. And they meet. And he says to her, "You smell delightful." And she's been saying all the time, "I'm over here, come and get me." You took your time. So the head of the sperm is loaded with sniffers. Really, it's a sophisticated guidance system. Well, why does the egg need to block against polyspermy? Why can't the egg afford to be fertilized by 2 or 3 or 4 sperm? All the cells in the human body have 46 chromosomes, except 2. So all the cells, the billions of cells, and they would have 46 chromosomes in them. Same with the man. But there are 2 cells that don't have 46 chromosomes. Now I wonder which 2 cells they could be. It's the egg and the sperm. So I wonder, could we hazard a guess? I wonder how many chromosomes does the egg have and how many does the sperm have? Well, we can answer that. 23. Sperm, 23. So when they come together, you have the complement of 46. Coincidence? I would suggest not. When the egg is fertilized by the sperm and the 2 nuclei fuse together, the chromosome count becomes 23, 23, 46. So why do we need the block against many sperms fertilizing that egg? Well, what the chromosome count be if you got 2 sperm fertilizing? And the count would be 69. It's called a triploid. And polyspermic fertilization is a lethal event, according to Wikipedia. Polyspermy is lethal in man. So now we can understand why the egg must be in a position to block polyspermy. Polyspermy causes the zygote to die. Well, life begins. We're going to see this image a lot this evening. Now, don't forget, it's magnified thousands of times. That would be the size of a full stop. It's the fertilized egg, the information within the egg and the information within the sperm unite, and that is going to make a child. It's packed with information that will create the person. So that is going to lead to that. It's a photograph of a baby that's just been delivered from its mother's womb. And it all starts with the fertilization of the egg, which is impossible without the acrosome, which is impossible without the proteins and other things besides. Fertilized egg. 1 add 1 equals, well, there's a prize if you get the answer. It's 2. Well, not quite. 2 billion. When the egg is fertilized, the zygote, it splits into 2. And there's a picture of it. That's how you and I started. But then those 2 split into 4, those 4 split into 8, 8 into 16, and so the division continues. And the Reader's Digest book, just called The Body, on page 16, we read, perhaps the ultimate wonder among cells is the female egg. Once fertilized, this single cell divides into 2 cells, which in turn divide. Division continues until they're the 2 billion cells of a baby. Doubles and doubles and doubles. But that raises a question, certainly in my mind. What would happen if it stopped doubling before the 2 billion? So imagine it got to 1 billion cells, but then failed to double. What would happen if it didn't stop doubling? Well, it would have the potential to fill the universe. Well, how does the egg know when it's time to stop doubling? Because that fertilized egg is loaded with information that will see to all of this, the formation of the child within the womb and even the initial stages here in the doubling process. How does the egg know when to stop doubling? Well, there's a timer that I've got. The time is now 14:05, but I've set the timer to go off at 14:10. So once 14:10 arises, the bell is going to ring. It will go off at this precise time because I've programmed it to do so. I transferred something into that little computer there, and it wasn't anything physical that I put into that computer. It was information. I put information into that computer, and because of what I put in, that the bell will sound once it gets to 14:10. So I put information into this device, which will cause it to go off at 14:10. The National Center for Biotechnology Information, based at Maryland, USA, states on its website, through fertilization, the egg is activated to begin its developmental program. Program? I wonder who wrote the program with its critical timing. So the egg doubles and doubles and doubles and doubles until we reach the critical stage of 2 billion cells, after which that doubling process shuts down. Well, who wrote the program? Deciding the gender, we've seen this before. XX means a girl, XY means a boy. So there's the fertilized egg. The X of the egg is combined with the X on the sperm, and it's going to be a little girl who's born. All the information in that fertilized full stop will create this beautiful girl, and her future development is enclosed within this fertilized egg. Her hair color, her skin color, the shape of her nose, her size, etc., etc., etc. All the information to make up that young girl with the features that we see on the outside and all the organs that we see on the inside is there. And even her hips. Now you might think that's something strange to say. So within that fertilized egg, there is even the information for her hips. The female pelvis differs from its male counterpart in that it is wider. This is to accommodate any future childbearing. So XX means it's a girl. XX means the pelvis is going to be wider than its male counterpart because it's anticipating future childbearing. And there is the female pelvis. Baby Grace, therefore, is programmed to have a wider pelvis. And it's all there in the zygote, the XX. She's well, most women can't wait to perhaps not enjoy the pain of childbirth, but can't wait to embrace the baby in their arms. Dry bones. The pelvis bones are held together tightly by their connecting ligaments. During delivery, these ligaments need to be relaxed, so allowing the pelvis to expand to make delivery easier. It's by no means easy. And there are the ligaments. Now, in childbirth, those ligaments need to be relaxed. And so it allows the pelvis to expand marginally to accommodate the descent of the child through the birth passage. Amazingly, the ligaments are relaxed by two hormones. Hormones are chemical messengers that are produced in the body, either of the mother or of the child. But in childbirth here, these two hormones, progesterone and relaxin, they cause those ligaments to relax. These timely specialized chemical messengers instruct the pelvis ligaments to relax prior to birth, thus enabling the baby to have an easier exit through this bony structure. There's the passageway, and the baby is going to make its way down, and the ligaments are going to be loosened because of those two chemical messengers. And all that information is contained within the fertilized egg. Are they different? Is the female pelvis different to the male pelvis? If a woman had the male pelvis, the child would never make the great escape. There's the male pelvis. And you can see how the passageway is certainly a lot smaller than the female. And all of this information, if it was XY, it would be the male pelvis that you see below. But because it's XX, that child is destined to have a wider pelvis to accommodate any future childbearing. When baby Grace was born, she was born with eggs already in her small body. This is amazing. Approximately 1 million. And those eggs are the guarantee of the next generation. No eggs, no next generation. It has been said that young girls are given a bank account at birth. You've got 1 million eggs. They can only withdraw from that account. They cannot deposit. And all the information for those eggs that will secure the next generation is in that fertilized egg. That's a picture of my granddaughter. It was the ultrasound that was taken, is it 3 months, over in America. And there she is. And she says, I can feel the eggs developing, 1 million of them. She's about 3 years old now. But inside her little body, she's got the 1 million eggs. That will guarantee one day, hopefully, that she'll bear her own children. And that's all contained within the fertilized egg. The word morula is Latin for mulberry. 16 cells at approximately 3 days. So it's doubled and doubled and doubled. And eventually, it will become the blastocyst. At approximately 5 days, it has traveled the journey of a lifetime, I call it, 11 centimeters down the fallopian tube and has reached the womb. The inner cell mass, that's going to develop into the embryo, the fetus, the baby. And those outer layers, the trophoblast, will develop into the placenta. It goes something like this. There's the fallopian tube. To the right of the fallopian tube there, you'd have the ovaries that produce the eggs, but the egg is fertilized within the fallopian tube. There's the womb. And the egg makes its way down the fallopian tube, carried along by cilia, hair-like structures. It's unidirectional, one direction. You don't want to go the other way, and it ends up in the womb. It needs to embed itself in the lining of the womb. The egg realizes this, and the lining of the womb is called the endometrium, and needs to erode the lining, very similar to the erosion of the surface of the egg by remember the acrosome on the head of the sperm. So he releases the hydrolytic enzymes. There we are, they're released, and a pathway is digested into the endometrium. There we are, erosion successful, time to embed. Snug as a bug in a rug, it's called implantation. Anchors down, needs to secure itself in the lining of the womb. Anchoring columns, and there it is, nestled in the lining of the womb. Ah, but there's a potential danger, isn't there? You see, during the woman's monthly cycle, the lining of the womb is shed. But if the lining of the womb is shed, that fertilized egg is discharged along with the lining of the womb. Since the blastocyst is embedded in the lining, it is absolutely imperative that the monthly cycle does not take place. And what happens? The trophoblast, there it is. It begins to produce and secrete a special hormone, abbreviated to HCG. And there's the official name, chemical text message. 2. The HCG text messages, chemical text messages, the mother's body that she's pregnant, and causes the ovaries to stop releasing eggs. You see, the next month there'll be another egg released, but you don't want another pregnancy beginning. And the following month there'll be another egg released, and there's no way you can have 3 pregnancies on the go at the same time. And so this hormone text message causes the ovaries to stop releasing eggs, stop the egg shipments. It also text messages the ovaries to increase the levels of progesterone and estrogen to stop the lining of the womb from being shed. Because every month the lining of the womb is shed, but if there's going to be a successful fertilization of the egg and developing fetus, then that lining must not be shed. And so this small, barely visible, embedded into the endometrium there, it sends out these 2 chemical messengers that will to the ovaries to produce these hormones here that will stop the lining of the womb from being shed. And they tell me that all of this happened by chance. It just shouts out design, design, design. So there's the inner cell mass. We've said that that's going to develop into the embryo. And you've got the trophoblast, which is going to develop into the placenta. The placenta, well, there it is. There's the child in the womb. You can just make out the umbilical cord making its way from the baby's belly button up to the placenta. Dr. DeLeo, he calls it the most miraculous organ of all. That the placenta is an unusual organ, and that you and I, we've got kidneys, we've got a heart, we've got a liver, pancreas, and other things besides. But we have those organs all of our life. But this organ, called the most miraculous of organs by Dr. DeLeo, it is a life support machine. But here's the interesting thing. It's the only organ your body will grow for a specific purpose and for a specific period, after which it will be ejected. What is its specific purpose? It's a life support machine. Without the placenta, there would be no birth. Specific period. Well, it's only needed for the 9 months. And after that, it's not needed, so it's ejected. Life support machine. Dr. Menton says, with the help of the mother's blood, the placenta must function as the baby's lungs, the baby's kidneys, the baby's digestive system, the baby's liver, and the baby's immune system. Perhaps this is why Dr. DeLeo calls it a miraculous organ. So there's the unborn child in the womb. There's the mother's blood. You see, we've surrounded the baby with the blue there, because inside the womb, the baby is surrounded by a liquid. It's called amniotic fluid. And there's the placenta. So the mother's blood is fed into the placenta. And there's the umbilical cord. And the umbilical cord, you'll find the baby's blood. And the mother's blood and the baby's blood, they appear to meet in the placenta, although they don't actually meet. We'll see why. Please note, the fetal blood and the maternal blood do not mix. Dr. DeLeo again, the fetal blood and the maternal blood do not mix. In fact, if this were to be the case, there would be such an immunological protest from the mother that she would soon make enough antibodies to destroy the pregnancy. If the mother's blood is rhesus negative and the embryo's blood type is rhesus positive, then the mother's antibodies would treat the embryo as an invading foreign organism and try to destroy it. If blood type A, for example, let's give the mother blood type A, and the baby was blood type B, and they were to mix, Wiki says it could be deadly for both of them. So we can see that the bloods must not mix, and yet they appear to meet within the placenta. Well, we're going to find that the placenta protects not only the fetus, but it also protects the mother. Let's show it diagrammatically here. The oxygen and the nutrients carried in the mother's blood are diffused through the placental barrier. There's the placental barrier. The mother's blood has oxygen and nutrients that the baby needs. So she must be able somehow to get that oxygen and nutrients through the barrier into the baby's bloodstream. It goes something like this. So let's see those white dots. Let's imagine that they're the oxygen and the nutrients. And what happens, they're able to filtrate through the barrier into the baby's bloodstream and then up the umbilical cord into the baby's plumbing system. Carbon dioxide, the baby has to get rid of its waste products, and it does it like this. The blood with the waste products comes to the placenta, and we've shown it there with those black dots, and somehow or other they have to get over that placental barrier into the mother's blood, and this is what happens. They do that, they're able to get through the barrier into the mother's blood, and then carbon dioxide to the lungs to be breathed out, and other waste products to be ejected from the mother's body, normal ways. And all of this information within that fertilized egg. So Peter Medawar, a Brit, he won the Nobel Prize in physiology and medicine in 1960. He did work on transplants. He declared that the survival of the genetically different child within a mother's womb contradicted the immunological laws that were thwarting their attempts at tissue transplantation. See, what they found out in the initial days of transplantation was that the body of the recipient would reject the organ that had been put into it. For in some way, the body that was receiving the organ realized that what was being put into it wasn't its tissue, it was foreign tissue. And Peter Medawar, he said, well, how is it that a genetically different child within the mother's womb isn't rejected? Fascinating. Why doesn't the mother reject the fetus? In 1998, researchers at the Medical College of Georgia in Augusta, USA, reported a landmark discovery. They found this, that the mammalian embryo produces a special enzyme, indoleamine 2,3-dioxygenase, abbreviated to IDO, which suppresses the mother's reaction to abort and allows the pregnancy to continue. So the embryo, the developing fetus, even in its early stages, releases this enzyme which will suppress the mother's autoreaction to reject the fetus. It was also demonstrated in humans that the IDO was produced on the embryo side of the placental membrane, which separates mother from child, not on the mother's. So it's the embryo who initiates the production of this enzyme. It's as if the egg realizes, the fertilized egg, the developing embryo, realizes it can't afford to be ejected or rejected. And it has this enzyme which suppresses the mother's body's desire to reject it as foreign tissue. It's amazing, isn't it? Could you live normally at Everest altitude? The atmospheric pressure at the summit of Everest is 33% that of sea level. So if you were to stand on the top of Mount Everest and breathe in, you are only taking in 1/3 of the oxygen that you would take in if you were breathing in at sea level. Therefore, there is 66% less oxygen than there is at sea level if you were to live on the top of Mount Everest. It's the extremity at which man can exist. So Joseph Barcroft, physiologist, The fetus lives and grows downstream from the maternal oxygen supply in partial pressure of oxygen, which is so low, a special term has been coined to describe its supposedly perilous existence. Now, before we tell you what the special term is, we need to realize that the baby that develops in the womb of the mother has a pair of lungs, but isn't using those lungs. It's surrounded by fluid. It's not using those lungs to take in oxygen as you and I do on the outside of the womb. It's getting its oxygen supply from its mother. But the mother, her organs want oxygen. And now she's got, in her womb, she's got a developing child with organs too that are craving out for oxygen. But the baby, the developing fetus, is so far downstream that the oxygen supply is really, it's limited. And Sir Joseph Barcroft, he coined this phrase, Everest in utero. The child in the womb, for those months in the womb, it's the equivalent of living the top of Mount Everest. The unborn child is living in such an oxygen-starved environment. It is the equivalent of living at the top of Mount Everest. The baby's heart inside the womb. There's the human heart, the adult heart, should we say. And as we know, it's got 4 chambers: right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle, and left ventricle. And from the right ventricle, the blood is pumped to the lungs to get rid of the carbon dioxide. It goes something like this. There's the lungs, there's the heart. And what happens is that from the right ventricle, the blood is pumped to the lungs. You breathe out carbon dioxide. Then you breathe in, and it's oxygen. The oxygen goes into the blood to be carried through the piping system, through the arteries, to the heart, and then it's going to be pumped from the left atrium, and then it's going to be pumped around the body. And that's the circulatory system. What about the baby's heart? Well, there's the pulmonary artery. There's the aortic arch. But the child in the womb, he has an extra piece of pipework. It's called the ductus arteriosus. There it is. You had that when you were inside the womb. And it works something like this. Instead of the blood being pumped to the baby's lungs, because don't forget, it's not using its lungs. It's not breathing out carbon dioxide and taking in oxygen. And so the blood supply doesn't need to be strong to the lungs. And this extra piece of pipework, the ductus arteriosus, allows the blood to be dispensed throughout the body. It is, in fact, it is a bypass, a very neat piece of extra pipework that allows the lungs to be bypassed and the oxygen to be supplied to those distant areas of the fetal body. The DA allows most of the blood from the right ventricle to bypass the fetus fluid-filled lungs. And so there we see how it's dispersed, carried through the blood system to those distant parts. Well, you're probably asking, well, what happens when the child is born? It certainly needs a lot of blood going to the lungs. Well, this is amazing. Usually the DA begins to close after birth. So that piece of pipework begins to close once the breathing is established. Normally it is completely sealed after 4 to 10 days. A cord-like vestige of the DA called the ligament arteriosum remains. So take a look. This is what happens. The pipe is sealed and it leaves a ligament. So now the blood can be pumped to the baby's lungs. Bypass? Well, I think that's jolly clever. And all of that information is within that fertilized egg. A hole in the wall. If I was to ask you, would you like a hole in the heart? I suppose you'd automatically respond with no, certainly I wouldn't like a hole in the heart. Well, I've got news for you. There was a time when you had a hole in the heart. There's the adult heart. The atrial septum is the dividing wall between the two atria. So look, there's the atrial septum. It divides the two atria, the right from the left. In the womb, the baby relies on the mother to provide oxygen-rich blood from the placenta through the umbilical cord to the fetus. Dr. DeLeo again. There's the placenta. There's the umbilical cord. Oxygen is provided by the most miraculous organ of all, the placenta. Miraculous. And what happens? There's the oxygen coming through the placenta, up the umbilical cord, into the baby's system. There's an actual photo of an umbilical cord. It's actually got a knot, which sometimes happens. Oxygen and carbon dioxide will travel through the umbilical cord. It's called the true knot of umbilical cord. And this is when we take a close look at the umbilical cord, it's got an outer coating of Wharton's jelly said to protect the cord and the blood-bearing vessels themselves. There's the umbilical vein. Up the umbilical vein, we find that oxygen travels from the mother's system through the umbilical vein to the fetus. And the arteries, well, they bring back the waste products and they travel down these two pieces of pipework. And so all this information for the umbilical cord with the arteries and the umbilical vein and the Wharton's jelly, all contained within that fertilized egg. But there's the unborn child. While in the womb, the heart of the unborn child has a small hole in the atrial septum. And it's called the foramen ovale. There's the hole in the heart. This opening allows the blood to bypass the lungs. So don't forget, the baby in the womb is not using its lungs. So from the right ventricle, remember the blood is pumped to the baby's lungs. But because it's not using its lungs, it just needs a minimal supply of oxygen. And this is what happens. And that little hole in the heart allows the blood to bypass the right ventricle and go straight into the left atrium. It's a bypass. There's actually a third bypass system, which we won't get time to look at tonight, but isn't all this wonderful? Well, certainly in my mind's eye, it is. It's absolutely wonderful and smacks of design. There's a baby that's just been born. See the umbilical cord. At delivery, a reflex, this is Dr. DeLeo again, at delivery, a reflex causes the newborn child to gasp for air. Its first breath. The lungs expand for the first time. And when they inflate at birth, the pressure falls so that it's easy for blood to flow into them. The breath of life. The flow in the heart becomes stronger on the left, which causes a one-way flap to slam shut over the foramen ovale, closing it. So it works something like this. The baby takes its first breath. As the pressure rises in the left atrium, a flap of tissue is pushed over the foramen ovale. So the pressure at birth, when the baby takes its first breath, the pressure increases in the left atrium. Let's take a close look at it. In the womb, there's the foramen ovale there. There's the hole in the heart. In the womb, the pressure is greatest in the right atrium, and that keeps the valve open. But then at birth, when the baby takes its first breath, the foramen ovale is closed because the pressure increases in the left atrium and the road is closed. And the normal pathway during that time when the child is in the womb, it's closed. The hole in the wall, the hole in the heart is closed, and it's pumped down to the right ventricle, and from there it's off to the lungs. So at birth, it's closed. Within a few days, it's sealed together, and the normal course is taken, and the blood is pumped to the lungs to discharge the carbon dioxide and take in the oxygen. And all of that information is packed within that fertilized egg. That's a lovely picture. I admire people like this lady here, Medes, who put this in the public domain. You know, that child has spent months inside its mother's tummy, and there he is, just born. You can see the umbilical cord. What's that? Mama's going to keep me on a key ring. It's not quite a key ring, is it? See the end of the scissors there. Whether or not they've clamped the cord or ready to cut it. Water molecules have strong attraction to other water molecules. And they say, let's stick together. And so what they do, they stick together. In the center of the glass of water, the molecules are sticking to other water molecules in all directions. However, this attraction is particularly strong on the surface of the water because the molecules have nothing above them to be attracted to. And so they pull harder to the sides. This pulling creates a skin on the surface of the water. It appears to be a skin. It's called surface tension. There's a lovely picture. Those beads of water on that twig there. Why doesn't the liquid run out there? Because there appears to be a skin, the surface tension on the water holding the liquid in. There's a classic photograph there. This is the pond skater. You can see the dents in the water. It appears as if the water has a skin. I remember doing this with children at school. You'd say to them, is it possible to float a paper clip on the surface of the water? And invariably they'd say no. And then to their amazement, we'd do it. We'd float a paper clip on the water. The paper clip will sink if a drop of soap is applied. we used to do this. We used to get just teeniest drop of soap. And as soon as you touched the surface of the water with the soap, the paper clip sank to the bottom. Because the soap interferes with the attraction between the water molecules. It breaks the surface tension. The soap has become a surfactant, a surface active agent. So we take in our oxygen down the trachea and into the lungs. We open up the lungs. This is what they look like. If we turn it upside down, well, the airways branch out inside the lungs into an extensive tree-like network of small tubes that end in tiny air sacs called alveoli. Let's turn it upside down. It is like a tree. And just as the boughs become branches and the branches become twigs, and you get way down until you get to the small buds, it's exactly what it's like inside the lungs. And at the very end of these branches, you've got something called alveoli. And there we are. We try to enlarge it in the diagram. And it's in the alveoli that you get the gas exchange. And in the child that is born, approximately 150 million alveoli. And they're covered with an estimated 10,000 million minute blood vessels called capillaries, carrying the blood to and from the alveoli. The alveoli, that's where the gas is exchanged. The carbon dioxide is taken out of the blood into the alveoli and into the mother's lungs to be breathed out. Oxygen is taken, breathed in into the lungs and passes from the alveoli into the blood to be pumped around the body to the organs and the cells. This is a 3D ultrasound of a baby in the womb at 18 weeks. When a baby is born, it must convert from getting all of its oxygen through the placenta, the umbilical cord, to absorbing oxygen through its own lungs. So don't forget, inside the womb, that baby is not using its lungs. It has lungs, but it's not using them to breathe because it's surrounded by the amniotic fluid. And in the lungs, he has the alveoli, but they're all collapsed. The difficulty of inspiration during the baby's first breath is great because all the balloons, the alveoli, must be inflated from a collapsed state. So all the alveoli inside this baby's lungs, inside the womb, they're all deflated. But worse than that, there's a normal alveolus, but inside the baby, they're collapsed. All the walls of the alveoli are coated with a thin film of water, that fluid. The water molecules on the alveolar walls are attracted to each other, creating surface tension. So you've got 150 million alveoli inside this baby's lungs. They're all deflated, they're all flat, and they're all lined with a liquid. And it causes surface tension, causes the water molecules are attracted to each other. First breath is going to be very, very difficult for the child to take. The walls stick together because of the surface tension. And I've got 150 million alveoli to inflate when I take my first breath. If only I had some soap. Well, here's the amazing thing. Surfactant, a foamy, fluid, soapy substance, is produced by specialized type 2 cells that are found on the inner wall of the alveoli between the 34th and the 37th week of a normal 40-week pregnancy. That was the problem that premature births, one of the problems that premature births they had, that there was no surfactant. And all the alveoli had to be inflated with the surface tension going on within those alveoli. And here are the special cells that produce the surfactant. It goes something like this. The cuboid type 2 cells synthesize surfactant that is secreted onto the alveolar luminal surface to reduce surface tension. So in the later stages of the pregnancy, this surfactant is produced, and that soap breaks the surface tension. American Lung Association write, the surfactant is essential for the expansion of the alveoli. When an infant is born prematurely, their lungs have not produced the necessary amount of surfactant. Without surfactant, the lungs cannot inflate, resulting in RDS, respiratory distress syndrome, potentially fatal condition. And all the information for this soap, surfactant, is working. It's amazing, isn't it? Neil Armstrong, 1969, walking on the surface of the moon, July 21st. Down on planet Earth, he may well have worn a pinstripe suit, a bowler hat, and patent leather shoes. Such attire on the moon would have meant instant death. He had to be prepared in advance for his new environment. Armstrong's high-tech spacesuit, made up of 21 layers of material, was pressurized. This prevented his body fluids from boiling. His boots had to be able to withstand the serious heat of the moon's surface so as not to melt. His suit protected him from flying space particles called micrometeorites. The visor on his helmet was coated with an ultra-thin layer. It's a 2/millionth of an inch in thickness, which reflected the harmful infrared light but allowed Armstrong to see through it. He needed all of this in advance of stepping onto the moon. Prepared in advance. What about the baby? What about the transition the baby makes when it leaves the water environment of the womb and comes into the air environment outside the womb? You know, this has to be right at the time. You only get one chance at this. And there's the baby that's just made the transition. But he's prepared, he's ready, isn't he? He has the lungs that he needs, and he has the surfactant that he needs to help him inflate those lungs. And the hole in the heart is going to slam shut because of the pressure increasing. Once the cord is cut, because that baby at birth is still getting its oxygen through the umbilical cord. But once that cord is cut, he's on his own, and he has to be ready. There's an ultrasound of the baby in the womb at 19 weeks. Notice the spine clearly shown. All of that within that fertilized egg. It's all in the head. The pituitary gland. Where is the pituitary gland? Well, there it is. It's there. And let's take a close look at it. The pituitary gland, which is the size of a pea, is attached to the base of the brain by a thin stalk. It's called the master gland. It produces and secretes important hormones. Remember the chemical text messengers directed directly into the bloodstream. These travel throughout the body, directing certain processes or stimulating other glands to produce other hormones. From the several hormones produced by the pituitary gland, we'll briefly consider three of them: prolactin, oxytocin, and luteinizing. But before we look at these three hormones, interesting to consider something that happened way back in the 1920s. 1925, a man called John Scopes was put on trial in Tennessee, America, for teaching evolution in the public school. The evidence for evolution, which was presented to the court, included a list of 86 body parts that were said to be vestigial. What does vestigial mean? An organ or part of the body that has become functionless in the course of evolution. So there were 86 body parts that were said to be functionless, and their function had died off in the so-called evolutionary progress. German anatomist Robert Wiedersheim had drawn up a list of 86 useless organs. One of these was the pituitary gland. There's a lesson to learn here. The pituitary gland, useless. Back to the Reader's Digest book, The Body. A pinkish pea-sized piece of tissue, that's the pituitary gland, after the brain, probably the most complex organ in the body, the Earth's most compact and intricate chemical plant, the size of a pea. And it produces 3 useless hormones. Are they useless? Luteinizing, what does it do? This is important. This is an important hormone. It's crucial to ensuring a healthy reproductive system. So it's not useless, it's crucial. Luteinizing causes the ovaries to release an egg during ovulation. If fertilization occurs, luteinizing hormone will stimulate the corpus luteum, which produces progesterone to sustain the pregnancy so that the lining of the womb isn't shed in the normal monthly cycle. Oxytocin. This important hormone plays a crucial role in the childbirth process. Crucial? So it's not useless, it's crucial. Fetal growth eventually causes the stretching of the womb walls, which is detected by stretch receptors. So this is how it works. The stretch receptors send messages to the pituitary gland that, hey, I'm ready for delivery. I need some oxytocin. And the pituitary gland will secrete the infuse it into the blood, and it will slowly make its way down to the womb. The oxytocin signals the muscles and the walls of the womb to contract. Let the contractions begin. Sometimes, for medical reasons, it may not be wise for the mother to go full term. This happened with my wife. She had high blood pressure when our first child was born. And so they had to induce the child, bring about an early birth. And so what they did, they put an intravenous feed into the arm of my wife, and into that feed they put a chemical. Something like this. And the chemical that they put into my wife's system to cause the contractions that would lead to a premature birth was oxytocin. Synthetic oxytocin is branded as pitocin. And so the contractions start, press down, and the child is pushed further down until it makes its entry into the world. See, the whole system just smacks of design, shouts out design, but some people can't see it. Then we have the third hormone, prolactin, is a hormone that promotes lactation, the production of breast milk. You see, when the child is born, it needs to feed, but that fertilized egg contains all the information that will lead to the production of milk, and that stimulated by the hormone here, prolactin. There's the womb. There's the baby in the womb. There's the unborn child. There's the placenta. There's the mother's heart feeding the womb with those several blood vessels. When the child is born, the placenta is discharged. The average amount of blood in a woman is 4.7 liters. Blood flow to the placenta is roughly 500 to 800 milliliters per minute. As the placenta is torn away, the arteries, those several arteries that supply the placenta, are severed, they're ruptured. So the placenta comes away and the blood begins to flow at a rate of 500 to 800 milliliters per minute. The arteries must be stopped, otherwise there will be total blood loss within 9 minutes. 4 minutes, you lose consciousness. So once the placenta is discharged after the birth of the baby, somehow or other, that flow of blood must be stopped. Once someone loses 40 to 50% of their total blood volume, the risk of cardiac arrest and death is high. How can we stop the flow of blood? Dr. David Menton again. It is also important to note that the blood clotting mechanism is suppressed in the placenta and the uterine blood vessels during pregnancy, creating a situation comparable to a hemophiliac with 20 severed arteries. So the blood clotting mechanism in the womb is suppressed. And he's going to tell us that there are 20 arteries that are ruptured here. And he says you've got the same situation. It's just like a hemophiliac having 20 arteries that are severed. 20 severed arteries. How does a woman survive childbirth with such a wound? Well, amazingly. Let's enlarge it. There's one of the uterine arteries, at the end of which the rupture site are sphincter muscles. Let's open it up. And it goes something like this. The blood flows down and out. But once the placenta is discharged, those muscles at the site of rupture, the sphincter muscles, they crimp. It's like a purse string. They contract and stop the flow of blood. And mum survives. And all the information is within that initial fertilized egg. 20 large uterine arteries are severed. There's a picture of the placenta, the life support machine. It's real. That's a real one. And there's the umbilical cord that has provided the child on the other end with life for those 9 months, eh? With the help of the mother's blood, the placenta must function as the baby's lungs, kidneys, digestive system, liver, and immune system. The most miraculous organ of all. Produced just for 9 months, after which it is redundant and can be discharged from the body safely. And all the information in that fertilized egg. Richard Dawkins, the great high priest of atheism, he says, biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. But he says, just the appearance. Now, we've looked at conception and the child in the womb, just some of the things. And to me, it just shouts out design. And he says, well, it's the appearance of design. But how could these things have come about gradually? It's like Neil Armstrong stepping onto the moon. He had to be prepared in advance. And every child in the womb is prepared in advance for life on the outside of the womb. But it can't come about by small successive steps over alleged millions of years. The appearance. George Gallup, perhaps you've never heard of him, but you've heard of the Gallup poll, a Gallup poll normally taken at the times of elections. Well, George Gallup, he said this, and it's noted in Jeffrey Simmons' book, What Darwin Didn't Know. He said, I could prove God statistically. Take the human body alone. The chance that all the functions of the individual would just happen is a statistical monstrosity. And yet the likes of Dawkins and his followers would suggest that it all happened by chance. Well, says George Gallup, that is a statistical monstrosity. We're getting towards the end here. For thou, O God, didst form my inward parts. Thou didst cover me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks unto thee, for I am fearfully, wonderfully made. That's my granddaughter. My frame was not hidden from thee when I was being made in secret. Thy eyes beheld my unformed substance. And that's her today. From conception to the cry outside the womb, to being in McDonald's and licking ice cream in North America. Well, Jesus said, verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man or a woman be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Verse 7, John chapter 3, do not marvel that I said unto you, you must be born again. Every one of us we're born sinners. We live as sinners, and we have the choice to make. To die as a sinner, and the future is bleak. Or to die believing that the man on that cross, the Son of God, gave his life a sacrifice for our sins, in order that we, by faith, looking at him, believing in him, not only in his death, but in the triumph of his resurrection 3 days later, by believing that, we can be born again. Now listen to what he says. He's the one who created all of this, so the whole system. He created the first man, the first woman. He says, unless you're born again, dear viewer, unless you are born again, you cannot see the kingdom of God. You must be born again. As Moses, and this is the Lord speaking, he said, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. Moses lifted up a brass snake on a pole as the antidote to the poison that was within the veins of the people who'd been bitten by those fiery snakes in the desert on their way to the promised land. And they had this poison within them, but the antidote was the brass snake on the pole, and God said, look and live, look and live, look and live. And the rational mind said, a brass snake on a pole, what good is that? They perished. Now Jesus said, Moses lifted up the brass snake on the pole. He said, I'm going to be lifted up on a cross. God says, look and live, look and live, look and live. And the rational mind says, a man on a cross 2,000 years ago, what good is that? But the inquisitive mind will say, but who is it on the cross? The creator of the universe. Created the universe in 6 24-hour days, and he hangs for 6 hours on the cross, dying for our sins. The last 3 hours spent in thick darkness. And they buried him in a tomb, and after 3 days, he came back to life again. Christianity is unique. Unique in his birth, unique in his life, unique in his death, unique in his resurrection. Look, God says he was to be lifted up, and whoever believes on him, the promise is, will not perish, but have eternal life. Thank you so much for your patience. I hope you found it interesting. And again, please take on board the challenge of those last 2 slides. May God bless you.